Hey everybody, I don't know about you, but as you've watched out over the world, the war in Russia and Ukraine is not just isolated to Eastern Europe. It's spread all over the world, and you can see it in market instabilities. You can see it here. People who do not think that that war is affecting you, all you got to do is look at gas prices. You look at your food prices. You see the global change that has happened. But you know something that's also affected investments as well. And I've said all along, legacy precious metals is your navigator. They're the ones that see you through to get to the next level. The good news about this is even with market volatility, market instability, you've got options. And gold prices are rising as investors turn to gold. And gold presents a hedge against this inflation and that protects you against the weakening dollar, which we are seeing. Legacy Precious Metals is the only company I trust to deal with gold and silver and the other precious metals. You need this investment. You need this as part of your portfolio to keep you buffered from what we're seeing in the world, war and volatility in the market. This is where you need to be. Call Legacy Precious Metals today. Be proactive about this. Get on board with it. Call them at 866-528-1903, 866-528-1903, or you can download their free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com. legacypminvestments.com, your navigator in a volatile world of investments.
Do you want to listen to a podcast?
By who?
Georgia GOP Congressman Doug Collins.
How is it?
The greatest thing I have ever heard in my whole life.
I could not believe my ears.
In this house, wherever the rules are disregarded, chaos and mob rule. It has been said today, where is bravery? I'll tell you where bravery is found and courage is found. It's found in this minority who has lived through the last year of nothing but rules being broken, people being put down, questions not being answered, and this majority say, be damned with anything else. We're going to impeach and do whatever we want to do. Why? Because we won an election. I guarantee you, one day you'll be back in the minority and it ain't gonna be that fun.
Hey everybody, it's Doug Collins. Welcome back to the Doug Collins Podcast. Glad to have you here. You know, back in the 90s when Bill Clinton was running for office, James Carville was one of his political consultants. And he came up with a focus. And the political campaigns is like everything else. You need a focus. And if you don't have a focus and everybody sort of has their input and they sort of flow everywhere in, this rabbit to get this vote, that vote. And Carville came up with a very simple idea, and he said it's the economy, stupid. He wrote it on the board, said this is economy, stupid, nothing else. This was the focus that the Clinton campaign wanted to have on the head up with Bush. They were going to discuss the economy. They're going to discuss where we're at as a country. And so he just made it very simple. It's the economy, stupid. Well, today on the podcast, I want to just go back to where we're at now with Joe Biden with inflation at 8%. We're seeing the Fed rate go up. We're seeing everything that is out there, and you're feeling it just in everyday life. It's been approximated that right now, over a year over last year, that people are paying anywhere from $250 to $400 more a month simply because of inflation and this economy that Joe Biden can't seem to wrap his hand around is not good. He's even, talked about it even this week, that it being a good thing. The economy's fine. And the reality is, frankly, with inflation and everything else, it's not. So I want to just to lay this out in simple form, talk about why this matters, where we're headed out, and what we can do to sort of look at, and just some practical measures is what does this 0.75 rate increase actually look like? How's it going to affect you? And where we could be heading? Because it's things that we actually need to know. And I think some people think it's an easy fix. And this is another issue that just can't be. The Biden administration has made this out to be an easy fix, in which it is not an easy fix. But I ran across something the other day that I wanted to bring to this podcast to sort of start us off here as we discussed. And it was 5 basic premises, or it's just some basic premises, and I'm going to use a few of them here to talk about, sort of to set up this discussion on economy and discussion on why inflation matters, because it's a basic principles of governments. It's basic principles of discussing the effects of real world choices. And you can have a conservative viewpoint that means that government is limited in its focus, limited in its actions, and it's not something that it should have its role, but it shouldn't be the over-dominant player in the marketplace or in the especially in the economic stream. And then you also have the liberal point of view, which says no, government ought to be the main function. Government should be the main takeover of everything that we are seeing. These are differences that affect you. So again, where you see the money coming from, where you see the economy being driven from, these are going to matter. So I just wanted to hit a few of these real quick and just let you sort of see just like I said, when it came to me, it was just an interesting point of view. One of those was the first one statement, and these are just sort of 5 statements of fact in many ways. It says you can't legislate the poor into prosperity by legislating the wealthy out of prosperity. We hear a lot of discussion right now from the left and from others about people who make too much money. They ought to be taxed. They're not paying their fair share. Again, this is an interesting proposition because you can't legislate the poor out of poverty or into prosperity out of poverty. It's you have to set the right environment. You have to have, you give them every possibility to succeed, every possibility to have the opportunity to go out, earn a living, make a job or for themselves, or to start a business, however they wanted to do it. But you're not going to legislate them out. In other words, you can't use the government to say, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to give them so much money and it's going to take them into prosperity. That's just not the way it works. It's just as much as you can't to legislate wealthy out of prosperity, because again, it's a balance in this country and really all over the world, whether we want to admit it or not, that the legislating of these issues is just not the proper response to it. You're not going to be able to have a government unless you're wanting to go to a government only system in which socialism, that basically is just our communism, where we all hold things in collective. This is just not going to be. But yet many times in the government, especially liberals and especially the Democrats now, Bernie Sanders, Warren, so many, Elizabeth Warren and others, AOC and others, believe that the answer to all the problems is simply take more money out of the rich or take more money out of the corporations, and then that would solve everybody's problem. The reality is we've seen that it doesn't work. It doesn't exist. And if you ever get into the actual details of what they're trying to say here, is they make it sound like many of these never pay any tax or anything else, and that's just simply not true. So the first principle, and it's just a basic principle, is we just talk about economy in general, is just one, you can't legislate the poor into prosperity, and you can't legislate the wealthy out of prosperity. Number 2, this is an important one, and this is something that I see so much right now when I was in Washington, D.C., among some of my liberal colleagues and some of the liberal activist groups. It was this. This is when one person receives what one person receives without working for, another person must work for without receiving. This is the very essence of many times the government solution to just giving people money, giving people taxes. And I've heard this just this past week that, especially in these last couple of years with the COVID and the pandemic, we've had all this discussion about, well, we need to give people, the jobs are out, or we need to give them stimulus money. We need to make sure that they have money to spend. And all of this is a rolling over problem in the sense of that the government itself doesn't have anything. And that's really the point number 3, that nothing the government gives to you or gives to anybody is from government that it doesn't first have to take from somebody else. Now think about that for just a second. Nothing you have received from the government did not either come from you indirectly or come from someone else if you didn't pay into it at all. And so to think that government is your solution to these issues, and to think that it's just free money. I hear this, and I even heard conservatives actually have said this, especially some when it came to Social Security or came to others, is that it's my money, or if it's theirs, it's just if it's the federal government's giving it away, why don't I take it? Well, in some ways, the sentiment is true, because the federal government already took it from you, the taxpayer, because the government doesn't make anything. This is one of the fundamental problems of the economy that you have to understand, is the government doesn't make anything. There's no widgets. There's no production. There's no services. This is not it. It comes from the taxpayer, and that's how they spend their money, or they borrow it. This has become more and more the issue that we've seen lately, is that they just borrow the money, and in borrowing the money, we see that our debt's going up. The issues are surrounding debt, which I'm going to get to in just a little bit, especially when it comes to inflation and rising interest rates, are going to come back and be a problem. So when you look at this whole foundation and the sole basis of where we're going as a country in our economic status, you've got to understand that the government is a central element of this problem, but it is also not the solving element of this problem, because there's nothing the government can provide indirectly or direct payments, however you want to put it, that will actually, make this a situation that doesn't actually get worse. You can't just keep putting money into the system or borrowing money into the process and make this situation of inflation and the interest rates and things that are going up right now get better if you don't take into the whole picture of where we're at. So as you look at this, there's another principle here is you can't multiply wealth by dividing it. In other words, you can't continue to make wealth grow if you're dividing it, if you're constantly taking it away. You can't, it's just not a principle that can work. So I just wanted to lay this out, today as we started this podcast, just to understand that in the beginning of our economy, when you talk about a capitalist economy, a free market, it is free market thought, it is capitalist thought that have brought more people out of poverty in the world than any other economic philosophy in the world. It is given over and over and over again. It is the best way. The problem is that when you as a government begin injecting into the economy, when you as a government take reckless spending and giving it into ways in which you're warned, and we're talking about the American Rescue Plan here and the money that was put back into the economy after money had already been put in from the previous COVID spending bills and not had been spent, then you end up with a problem. So this is something that I want to get to. Why does it matter? I've heard this question. I was asked this question before this past week, and I said, well, I'm going to address this on a podcast. And I want to. Why does it matter? Why does inflation matter? Remember, now there's one thing that you need to understand is that there is a sense you don't want deflation. In other words, you don't want dropping prices all the time. I know that sounds contrary if you're out there wanting to buy something, but that's dropping prices or unexpected drop in prices or across the board drop in prices that are due to an economic issue are not good. From a business standpoint, they're going to cut back, they're going to lay off, and then you're going to have the reverse cycle of unemployment and problems going there. So an inflation rate around 2% is what the target is for most economists through the Federal Reserve and others, is at 2% inflation rate, which keeps, moderate, there's a little bit of growth in the economy, but it's nothing that's not taken up by other factors in the economy. So you have to have a little bit of that. So that's one issue of inflation is not entirely bad. It's not just that you don't want any inflation, because of that borrowing money and also growing businesses and new products and new services. So you have some of that. Number two is that inflation, and you're seeing this right now. If you're listening to this podcast anywhere in this country, or frankly anywhere in the world dealing with inflation, you understand that it erodes your buying power. What you could, think about this, and I'll put it in very simple terms. If you had $100 that you went to put $100 worth of gas in your vehicle a year ago, now that same $100, and I'm just going to use a round number here, if it bought you $20, 20 gallons of gas back then, it'll only buy you about 15 gallons of gas now. So that same $100 only buys you 5 gallons less of gas. And those are just approximates, to put you in perspective of what I'm trying to say. You can see it in bacon, you can see it in other places. So if you were spending $100 on groceries and you were getting 10 items in that $100 worth of groceries, you're now able to buy 8 items or 9 items at the rate inflation is going up, especially among certain items. So inflation matters. It's one of the most devastating issues that you have within inflation, because the second part of that is that it hurts those on fixed incomes. And I say fixed incomes on the lower end, the poor disproportionately. Inflation is one of those things that actually takes a direct hit to those who can't afford it. So again, if you have a little bit more income, you just absorb the 10 or 15 extra dollars a month in gas costs or food costs. But if you have no extra to save, if you were using that $100 for groceries, then $50 for gas and $200 for rent and everything else, and it starts to go up and you don't have any extra income, then inflation is going to affect those on fixed incomes or poor far disproportionately. This is why it's also interesting to me that the government fixed from liberals, and what we see out of the Biden administration and we see out of the Senate and we see out of the House currently controlled by Democrats, is that they think that the issue here is to simply give more money away and to add it to it. This becomes your biggest problem. One of the problems that we have with inflation is that inflation comes when prices begin to go up, either through shortages or through higher demand and people willing to pay a higher price. It's pretty simple economics here, but the Biden administration has just chose not to look at it. So this why inflation matters. We've talked about just some basic principles of government and understanding of budgets. Let's also talk about one thing in the federal budget itself. This is something that I have talked about a great deal in Congress, and I've talked about it outside. The basic budgeting system in Washington, D.C. is broken. You've got to understand this, okay? If you don't understand this, then we're not even in the same page as far as trying to fix it. So let me just break it out very simply. And I used to do this with a dollar bill. And these are rough approximations. So if you're out there trying to say, you're 2 percentage points off, then that's, again, you need to understand what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to put the budget in perspective, because I hear so many times about the Balanced Budget Act. And why don't we just do a Balanced Budget Act? Well, you're getting ready to find out that would be a good thing, because we can't balance it on a federal level. But the implementation of a Balanced Budget Act is something that will be, especially if it's not phased in over a number of years, would be devastating on the economy, because the government has entwined itself so much in our regular economy now that cutting it back to just basically almost everything in the federal government, we've got a problem. And that deals with debt and other issues as we go forward. So let's just break this down for you. If you had $1, if you would, and again, these are from over the past few years, so numbers have fluctuated. I'm trying to take out the COVID spending, take out the extra spending that's out there. Let's just stick to what was normally in the range of the budget, if you would. First thing to understand about budget. In the appropriations bills in Congress, there's 12 of them. They're supposed to be passed individually. Most of the time they're not. They put in an omnibus bill. You have the typical spending is about half roughly is defense spending, and half is overall is your spending for everything else, for the most of it in the government. There also is another two categories in both the defense and the rest of the government spending fall under what's called discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is when the members of Congress have the ability to raise it or lower it. So if you wanted to spend $10 in defense instead of $5 in defense, that's discretionary among the members of Congress. Now there's a whole large load of the federal spending that is not even discussed in Congress, because it's called mandatory spending. For you at home, that would be like your house payment, your light bill, your car payment. Mandatory spending. In other words, you're going to spend that no matter what each month. You got a loan, you got a note. You're going to spend this money every month, no matter what comes in that month. Whether you have money or don't have money, it's going to come due. So let me explain this out. Why? And again, I get this question when I'm out speaking a lot. I get this question, sometimes it's been called into radio. And also, if you email me, go to the DougCollinsPodcast.com. You can email me right there these questions. And one of the questions is what is broke about the economy, and how can't we just fix it? Here's the reason why. If you take $1, and that dollar bill symbolizes the entirety of the federal spending. And I said, okay, now develop a budget based off that $1. Well, the first thing you have to know is you have to take off about 80 cents. And I'm giving a little bit of percentage wise, 80 to 82%, but I'm going to use 80 for just a round number. That 80% of that's taken off the block to start with, as far as federal spending goes, because it is what is called mandatory spending. It's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, debt, and some other issues, obligations, financial retirement obligations that the federal government has. So 80 cents, okay, this is growing over time, especially in the drivers of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Those are your largest drivers of the budget, plain and simple. For everybody out there who thinks it's foreign affairs money is given, money to foreign assistance and things. Less than 1% of the budget, right? Barely 1% of the budget. Not the issue. If you want to understand what drives the cost that we have in our federal government is in those mandatory spending, which frankly, and if you didn't know this, here's your surprise of the day, we don't even discuss when it comes to budgeting. Those are just normal. They're set in law, and unless you change the actual laws behind them and change the formulas behind them, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, those things don't change. The only real thing that might change is the COLA increases in Social Security. But again, for the most part, that's set. That's like your permanent note on your house. They're not going to change. That money is just going to grow. Especially, for example, if you wanted how that would work in your own home. If you had a variable rate mortgage, in other words, a mortgage that would go up, which by the way is getting ready to go up, that's the same way the mandatory spending works in Congress. So if you didn't understand that, that's something you have to understand. We don't have $1 to work with when we start. So if you take that dollar and you say it's roughly divided up between defense and discretionary spending, so you have about 20 cents, if we put this in perspective, to left to spend that. So if about half of it is military, which is about 730 million, 740 billion, I'm sorry, not million, $billion right now, that goes to the military. Straight off the top. Now, what's surprising to most people when I talk about this is that they think military spending was already under mandatory to start with, and it's not under mandatory. It's under discretionary. So we can address that number as needed. The rest of the federal government, as you know it, the rest of it completely, everything from the courts to the Congress to the presidency, all the cabinets, all of the FBIs, all of the Homeland Security, border agents, Food and Drug Administration, agriculture, everything, national parks, everything else that you know about, then comes out of that 10% roughly. Now, it's probably closer to 16% total, 8 and 8, but I'll just use for round numbers, 10%. So think about this. A dime is all that you have to spend on the rest of the federal government, everything we think about. So if you think about it in those kind of terms, I hear these people all the time talk about it, taking out agencies like Ed and Energy and these agencies. And the reality is, if you did that, would it affect? Yeah, to an extent, but you're only talking about 10 cents of the federal government is the budget that is spent if you divided it up in this kind of way to that kind of spending. What does that mean? Now, here's the interesting part. We have had the highest, by far highest revenues that we've ever seen in this country over the last few years. Highest ever. I mean, we're not talking, and this is why when Ronald Reagan said we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. He said this years ago. The truth is coming out, even more and more so now, because we don't have a revenue problem per se. We have a spending issue because the revenue is as high as it's been in forever, and that's with lowering taxes, raising taxes. I mean, again, we're just not there. Why does that matter? Because if you go back to that dollar bill that I talked about, if you take 100% of the federal budget, remember, I didn't say actual income. I just said federal budget, which doesn't mean that you have money that is actually coming in. It's only about 82 cents, 83 cents, maybe sometime a little bit higher, that actually is covered by revenue taken in from taxes and other means. Now, think about that one for a second. Think about what I just said. If we had based it on 100% of the total spending of federal government, and then we start breaking it down into what we actually bring in, we've got about, depending on a good year, 16% of our defense spending and 16% of our normal spending is borrowed money. We do this every day. That's what's called the deficit. Okay, that we have X amount coming in, we have X amount we spend. That's the deficit. That's the yearly deficit. Now, debt is different. Debt is the accumulated deficits each year, which is approaching 30 trillion right now. But this deficit is what we borrow every year to spend on our government in different, in the functions that we have of our government. So I want to lay all of that out for you to understand that the budget is simply not just shut it down because, again, we're borrowing money for defense. We're borrowing money for everything else in a limited fashion that we are. It is a broken system that needs to be fixed. And right now, I experienced it in Congress, and they're experiencing it right now. They don't want to fix it. Democrats don't want to fix it. They don't think that the debt problem is an issue, and the deficits are, quote, coming down. Well, they're coming down simply because of COVID spending and other things are not rising the debt. This is the same argument Biden and his administration have used about jobs and unemployment and everything else, saying that their economic policies caused the economic times that we're in and caused the lower unemployment and more jobs created, which it didn't. I mean, coming off of COVID, people were hiring back, people were coming back into the workforce. It was just an opening up of the economy, not anything that the Biden administration did. I lay all of this out then to get to the part of being, as I started this with this economy stupid. If you're looking at this from a Republican or conservative perspective going into the November elections, you've got to understand that people are feeling what I have just talked about on an everyday basis. If you don't, you're detached from reality. And what happened in the past week is that the Federal Reserve has decided to raise, because a little over 8% increase in the CPI, or the inflation index for May, really startled everyone. It had been lower in the previous month, and all of a sudden it came out at 8% in May, which was far higher than they thought it would be or could be. And so they put a 0.75 basis rate, which means that your interest rate is going to go up. It's going to make it harder to borrow money. What they're trying to do is cool down the economy. And you may say, well, Doug, that's a good thing. If it brings inflation rate down or brings gas prices down or brings, car prices down, whatever it is, food prices down, then okay, raise that rate up. And I may not have to may not be able to borrow money as easily, but the inflation rate will come down and it'll get back into my pocket. The reality is that's really not true either, because the Federal Reserve right now, Powell and the Federal Reserve, and also the Biden administration is is in more than just a bind. The problem that they're dealing with is that the number to slow down the borrowing, to slow down the economy, to try and bring out the prices out there, which cause this inflation number, is missing several key elements of the actual problem we have. Let's lay out this problem. And this is where conservatives, you need to be able to talk about this in terms of other than, look, the Biden administration is stupid. They don't know what they're doing. Okay, we can grant you, if you're conservative, we'll grant you that right now. But how do you explain that to somebody who may not follow this and they're trying to understand what can be done and why, frankly, if you're looking at it from an election standpoint, how do we elect people in November that actually understand that we've got to do more on these other issues? So let's take this. If there was normal economy that was growing, all of a sudden inflation started to go up due to a little more money in the system. There was, there's economic situations. You can adjust the number to gain control of borrowing, spending, keeping, that would tend to then decrease demand and decrease cost, if it's sort of in a better, perfect world. The problem is you're not. This is simply controlling the flow of money and the supply of money that people can get to. What they're missing in this whole problem, which started is that the government itself is part of the issue here. Government itself has put a lot of money into the system over the past couple of years. And last year, before the American Rescue Plan was actually voted on and approved by Joe Biden, he was warned by liberal economists, this will fuel inflation. And Joe Biden had the audacity just this past week to say that no, the American Rescue Plan didn't affect inflation. In fact, it made everything better. And all economists agree. No, they don't, Joe. Even your own economists don't agree. Even your own Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, has said that no, we miscalculated what this money would do to the inflation rate. And so far, we're seeing the inflation rate skyrocket. And that's one of the issues that is caused. Yellen has actually taken the fall for the administration on this. And Biden continues to double and triple down on it as if he's not reading the reports he's been given and saying, well, no, she's wrong that this didn't affect it. It did affect it. When you put extra money into a system, and here's where the problem comes in. When you put this extra money into a system that is already experiencing the turmoil of the pandemic. And this is where this basis point increase, and even if they do it again in July, I'm not sure will actually help the situation, but I think actually pushes us more toward a recession than it does anything else. And here's why. The pandemic brought some global supply chain issues. And this is one part of it, which meant that China, which we get a lot of our pharmaceuticals from, which we get a lot of product from, when they shut down in their country, they would shut down completely factories, everything else when it came to the pandemic. And that disrupted getting parts, getting supplies, getting microchips for trucks and everything else. All this is a problem. So people wanted these products. They had money to spend on these products. Prices went up because they couldn't get this. Is the old function of supply and demand. If you have high supply and low demand, the prices are going to be down. If you have low supply and high demand, the prices are going to go up. This is pretty simple. Right now, we have supply chain problems. In other words, we don't have much of a supply and we have a lot of demand. Prices will go up. One of the things that the Biden administration has not done, seemingly at all, is try to alleviate the supply chain issues. They talk about it, but they don't discuss it in real ways. How do we unload these ships that are sitting in ports? How do we get the products to the market? And then doing stuff that is just unfathomable, such as closing down baby formula plants. We have a shortage of baby formula in this country right now, in which we're shipping in metric tons of baby formula in from foreign countries to the United States because of this shortage. Who would have ever thought that we would be actually having to import things like this because we were desperate to get it? This shows in many ways that when you have supply and demand issues, it's not just simply the money side of it, which is there. Maybe it will lower the demand and the supply will eventually catch up. That's the hope, I guess, from the Biden administration and Powell, the Fed chairman, in raising these rates to get that done. But you can't divorce the fact that the supply chain issues and the fact that you can't get certain products, so building supplies are astronomical right now, car prices, food prices. And so a lot of that right now is, especially on the hard, durable goods side, is from the fact that you can't get the products. Supply is not there. Demand was still there. Product prices went up. The other issue in this is the other one that we haven't talked about, and that is the energy issue. Biden administration came into this, and you talk about this, the economy is stupid. This should be written on every Republican's forehead right now, because if it's not, then the Democrats they're probably not going to figure this out. But people right now see the gas prices, and they see the direct impact every day in their economy. And don't hand me the fact that electric cars, we get to bypass the pump, we don't think about it. Well, you're going to start thinking about it, because most of you, especially the Biden administration's war on our energy independence, is going to catch up to us, because a lot of the energy that you actually use to power your electric vehicle comes from fossil fuels, from coal and other things, and natural gas, which the Biden administration is discouraged. They're actually trying to use this to push people toward, quote, clean vehicles, without ever addressing the backside problem of how are you actually charging these vehicles, and what are you using to power the electrical grid for these vehicles. This is something that's just not been, frankly, thought out very well. I mean, you can put as many charging stations as you want in many in convenience stores and shopping centers across the country, but you're still getting the power from the basic thing that the Biden administration is fighting against, and that's fossil fuels. Again, it doesn't make sense here. It's the economy, stupid. But when you have $4 and $5 gas and diesel, this is a topic that will not, frankly, be divulged by or solved by these interest rate hikes. This is an issue that needs to be, the Biden administration needs to go to work, actually getting work, instead of, as they did this week, attacking the energy companies. They need to work with the energy companies, say, how do we get our production up? How do we get our domestic production up? How do we make sure that we have more supplies and more in the field? And how do we get our factories, our refineries pumping out more gas and diesel every day? Should be the topic. And you've not heard that from the administration. In fact, you've heard nothing but except that we're going to continue the path, and this is just painful transition. And at the end, we're going to come out in this new green economy with electric vehicles everywhere. But again, without underlying the underlying address of how they're actually funding the fuels that actually put these electrical vehicles on the road. This is your problem. So all of a sudden you have the interest rates going up to make it harder for people to borrow money, which is designed to keep people from buying things. You have more money in the system from higher wages and other things that have went over the past couple of years of the stimulus money that's been put into the system, and which that means that supply may still be low, but demand is still relatively high. They're trying to do it in one way, but the problem is unless the supply chain issues get fixed and you start seeing supplies go up, it's not going to work. If you don't start working on energy and making us back energy independent, you're still going to have energy prices that are going to be through the roof. And at the end of the day, inflation will continue. Now, one thing that, before I let you go on this podcast, you do need to know one thing. Remember when I started off and I talked about the budget and I talked about the mandatory spending and I talked about debt repayment? One reason that our debt and deficit has not caught as much attention recently is the fact that basically it's been 0% of interest rates, or 1% is high. If those interest rates now start going up, which looks like what they're going to do, then it means that the higher the interest rate for our money is going to be. That means that the government is going to have to spend more and more money on interest on its debt than even military and even other spending. This is going to be the real reality of looking forward to what's happening in the economy. So again, lay this all out there for you. I hope this was a time in which you could just sort of look at the economy, look at what's going on, understand the budget in Washington, D.C., understand why it's broken, and understand why this administration right now is totally inept at fixing it. It's not just, and the Federal Reserve, frankly, they're doing the only thing they know to do, and that's to raise the rates to try and lower demand. The problem is the administration is not doing things on supply chain and energy costs that are driving this problem further than the Fed's numbers will actually be able to fix. You deserve the truth. I give you the truth here on the Doug Collins Podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure that you like us, share this, make sure that you get it out so that other people can understand what's going on actually in our economy. I want you to have the truth. I'm going to give it to you here every day on the Doug Collins Podcast. Thanks for listening. Hey, everybody. I just want to talk about sleep. You know why I want to talk about sleep? It's because I just got out from underneath my MyPillow bed sheets and my pillow that I keep under my head every night, because I like to sleep on my side. I like to sleep on my back. I like to sleep, I move at night, and MyPillow is just the best thing that goes under my head. It keeps me getting restful sleep. The sheets are amazing. It's just what you need. Everybody understands you need 7 hours of sleep. Why not sleep in some of the best products out there? And Mike and the folks at MyPillow are great folks to do this with. And you can go to mypillow.com, or you can call them at 800-564-8475. Use code word Collins, Collins. You won't want to miss this. If you have not got these Giza bed sheets, you need them. They're amazing. They're soft. They don't wear out. You need those to get that sleep against your body at night and provide that cooling, just soothing nature that lets you get the most sleep. But they're not just about bed sheets and pillows. They also have the My Slippers. Amazing. I've talked to you about it before. I don't wear slippers, but I do wear My Slippers. They're amazingly comfortable. You can wear them outside. You can wear them inside. Great products. You've got towels. You've got all kinds of stuff. Go to mypillow.com. It's spring cleaning time. It's springtime to get out there and try and buy new things. Replace some of your old stuff. You'll want to replace your towels. Get some other products for your bedroom. All at mypillow.com. Mypillow.com, or call 800-564-8475. Use the promo code Collins, Collins, when you check out. I guarantee you will be satisfied.